Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the left, I'm David Jones. Gary Pollan is out of town this week, and he's normally from the right. He's not very normal, but that's where he goes. Tonight we're going to discuss city issues and the candidates running for Houston City Council District J. Join us tonight are Marc Campos, president of Campos Communications, Sue Schechter, former Texas State Representative and former Harris County Democratic Party Chair, and Bill King, an editorial columnist for the Houston Chronicle, along with maintaining an online information resource, Bill King, a public policy discussion. He'll tell us more about that. I'm hopeful, thanks for all of you to be here to discuss District J. There's going to be a debate following this discussion, so, be on your toes and give them something to think about as they debate in the next show. Marc Campos, this is called a Houston Opportunity District for Hispanics. Profile the race for us, if you can.
Well, it's one of the two new council districts that the city is getting this year due to an agreement reached with minority groups back in 1979, District J and District K. I helped draw that district during the redistricting process earlier this spring, and we call it a Latino Opportunity District. It's a district that really doesn't have a lot of political infrastructure. There are three candidates, Rodrigo Canedo. I know him. I've known him since he was a little kid. He's best friends with one of my nephews.
Now he's a businessman.
He's a business owner out there. Criselda Romero. She's a staffer to Houston City Council member Ed Gonzalez, an activist, about 31 years old. And Mike Laster, he's run 3 times before, twice for City Council District F, which is a part of now District J, and he ran and had an unsuccessful race for state representative. Laster is raising the most money, but the other two candidates are working hard, and it's going to be a question of who's out there getting their folks out to vote early. I think it's an open race.
You do. The Chronicle endorsed Laster, and the interesting thing about the endorsement was where they sort of gave a profile of this district as the Ellis Island of Houston's future, certainly, with so many different groups and ethnicities in it. How is it that anybody of one ethnic group can break through, do you think?
Well, no one ethnic group is going to dominate in an election today. I think the population of the Latino community is around 65% of the district. I think it's a district that in the future will for sure elect a Latino, but right now there's a strong Asian, strong African American, older Anglo community there. So again, it's no incumbent, which means that a lot of people are just holding back, not donating their money, a lot of the big players that normally do.
And then should you be, if you were Marc Campos, wouldn't you be outraged that an Anglo-Democrat, Mike Laster, is trying to take out, people running for what was supposed to be an opportunity district for Hispanics?
This is a tricky district. I was on the redistricting committee, and when we looked at this district, it was crystal clear that it would take somebody really working in the Hispanic community, really getting everybody behind them, really being able to get the resources to win this, because it's sort of a dilemma. I mean, it is a 65% Latino district, but then you have Mike Laster, who's been a community activist in the Sharpstown Civic Club, which is a heavy voting turnout part of the district.
Yeah, what is this area, by the way? Can anybody know the general description?
Sharpstown and Gulfton area are the two anchor, I guess, what really makes the district. There are neighborhoods that surround that area that are also part of it.
Gulfton, heavy population numbers, but not heavy voting turnout. Sharpstown, not as much population numbers, but heavier vote turnout from older Anglo voters.
So really, Bill King, 17% of this district is registered voters Hispanic, which means that they really can't win.
Talking about this being the Ellis Island, this is where a lot of immigrants come that are not yet qualified to vote. So even though it's 63% Latino, Hispanic surname voters, my guess is in the actual election it's going to be more like maybe 20 or 30%. And Mike Laster has a long history of service from the Sharpstown area. He's well known, well liked out there, and it's that's where most of the votes are going to come. And so I think it's why most people are handicapping Laster to win the race.
And you, Marc Campos, are have announced, I read recently, that you're going to be involved in the Southwest Voter Education Project, where you want to register lots of Latinos for 2012, is what I read in the message, which means that I guess you're giving up as well on 2011?
No. Quite the contrary. Of course, we all know that Latino voting turnout has been dismal at times. I think this city election, the gap between Latino turnout and non-Latino turnout communities is going to narrow. You have competitive races in District H and I, which are represented by Ed Gonzalez, Councilmember Ed Gonzalez, and Councilmember Jade Rodriguez and I. You have a competitive races in 2 school board District 8 between Juliet Stepech and Dorothy Olmos, District 3 between Ramiro Fonseca and Manuel Rodriguez. The activity that's going on in District J with 2 Latino candidates, and then Bo Fraga, who's running in at-large too, comes from a family with a lot of involvement, the Fraga family here in Houston. So you could see a little bit of a Latino turnout boost this time around, and we're preparing for 2012. We think, with what's going on in national politics, where Latinos are getting bashed, we're the piñata, not Rick Perry, and so some of us have decided to take matters into our own hands. Are going to be doing serious fundraising next year.
And you're a former party chairman. You must be excited finally to hear Hispanics getting interested in.
Let me just talk back to 2011 right now, this election. I think Mark's right. I think you're not going to see much difference in who our voters are, because we were just looking at the 2009 numbers, where you had a well-funded mayoral race. It was 178,000 people that voted. 178,000 people. So with this election, with no real mayoral interest, it'll probably be lower. We're trying to figure out who will go out. I mean, if the numbers get much lower, we may just kind of have to, I don't know, take a holiday for Election Day.
Well, Bill, you do budget analysis, and so let me ask you to match up your budget knowledge with the instincts that voters have about government and what it can do for them. As I read the budget, it's about 60 cents of every dollar is police and fire. Another 12 is debt service. And it seems to me like all of that is just just overwhelms all of the quality of life budget items that would matter to people, especially people in lower income levels. So the question I have to ask you is, why should they care about city government? What is there to vote for? They're basically writing checks to cops and firemen and paying off bond holders. That's it.
Well, of course, you have what the bond money is going to be spent on in the future. That's an important issue. And that other, roughly third of the budget does fund a lot of important services. It funds the Parks Department. It funds the Health Department, a lot of things that people have direct contact with.
But the mayor just cut all of these particular items in her budget. Cops didn't get cut as much. I read your column. That's what you wrote.
The city is in a structural deficit, and it's going to continue that way until we have pension reform. I mean, the pensions are eating up a larger and larger percentage of the budget every year. It's going up geometrically, and the revenues are going up arithmetically, and so everything else between gets squeezed. In 2020, it's going to take $500 million to make our pension payments. That's about half the property taxes that we'll collect in 2020.
Yeah, do you get my point, though, Mark? What is it to get a low-income voter to get out and be fired up about in a city election, given what they do?
Well, it's in 1979, when the city went single-member districts, what that did was that empowered civic associations, neighborhood associations, where now district council members, 9, next year it'll be 11 district council members. They pay attention to what those civic associations want, whether it be a park improvement, a street improvement, a flood issue. And I think, and those civic associations can be in wealthy neighborhoods, they can be in poorer neighborhoods, and the people that are organized, they pay attention to these races, and they're going to be the bulk of the turnout when people start voting Monday.
But since 1980, turnout's been falling in city elections constantly. I mean, we've had a lower and lower percentage turnout ever since single-member districts, ever since term limits, I think, also affected turnout. In the 2009 mayor's race, the mayor got elected with the fewest number of votes, absolute votes, since I think 1968 or 72 or something like that. I mean, people have completely lost interest in municipal elections in the city, and I'm not exactly sure why, but that's a fact.
Well,
I think you're right. I mean, I think that we're all grateful our potholes are filled, our trash is picked up, our recycling is done. I think we all, as Houstonians, appreciate that in city services, but I think we're like really disconnected from that. Anything else matters.
but if you
what does it matter?
If you cut parks, libraries, and health, all right, which is what the last mayor's budget did, where is the leadership that says, rather than do that, let's have a general tax increase. After all, it's not that high given, the size of the city and the obligations that the city has, rather than having this regressive business with drainage fees and increasing water rates. Marc's folks would benefit from the rest of us, Bill and I and you, paying a higher tax rate, would they not? And where is the Hispanic leader that's saying, let's do that?
Isn't that what we're talking about nationwide? I mean, aren't we having this discussion that the rich should pay more and you should raise taxes through that way? Aren't we having that nationally? And aren't we talking about the 99% that are occupying Wall Street? I mean,
Just
this
now.
anger that's going on?
I think the disconnect is, if you look at polling, people will say, I will pay more money if it's going to have a specific result. I'll pay more money for more police officers. I'll pay more money to improve a road. But they're not willing to pay money for, just the general idea that things are going to improve. They don't trust government to deliver the goods and services anymore. So that's why you have things like the drainage fee, which barely passed, but it did pass because it was tied to a specific outcome. But generally, taxpayers are not prepared just to write a blank check to government and say, y'all make things better.
Who is government? When you're saying government, who do you think it is we don't trust?
I don't think they trust any level of government right now.
But we elect the government officials.
There's a lot of anger. A few weeks ago, one of the campaigns I'm involved in, we had people going door to door, and we debriefed them afterwards. And we asked them, "What are folks thinking out there?" And they said they're mad. They want change. They said, well, they may not be mad at a specific member of council, their own council member, but they're just mad whether it be a drainage fee that showed up on their water bill or a separate bill over the last couple of months. They may be mad about, it took a long time for the city to figure out how to take down the red light cameras. They may be mad because they can't water their lawns anymore because of the drought, and I think they're mad at what's going on in Washington, D.C., and so they're either not going to show up or they're going to vote, and I've told some of my clients and any other incumbents that are willing to listen, if you're running against a candidate that doesn't have the resources to campaign and you only get in the high 50s or low 60%, don't feel bad that night, because the electorate, we're not immune from what's going on nationwide, as you can tell. We have
address Bill's point then, given that the projections are that our revenue is not going to be increasing anytime soon. The sales tax numbers are not projected to be anything.
Correct that. No. So we actually, last month, we collected more sales tax in the city of Houston than we've ever collected before. Revenues are going up. The only time we had revenues go down was for a brief period of time in 2009 and 2010. Revenues have been going up ever since then. The fixed structural costs of the city are going up faster than those revenues.
Well, and your analysis or the analysis of Bill White, CFO, was that it's not going to be long before we're either going to raise taxes or we're going to have very severe draconian budget cuts. And so I'm asking only, is it the leadership of the lower income areas where we should expect those arguments to be made?
Well, I think, let me give you, for instance, our public schools. Our public schools have taken a big hit the last couple of years in terms of funding, and who's going to our public schools these days in Texas? It's more and more Latino students of color, and yet we're cutting back on funding. It's going to probably take maybe until we lose half a generation of students, who aren't able to achieve, aren't able to learn before, folks in the business community are going to have to decide, hey, we need to do a better job of funding our schools. but then schools need to do a better job of teaching our students. So I think it's going to probably take some sort of disaster of that magnitude before folks come to grips with what we need to be doing.
I think until you start seeing some problem that people can see on the street, you have a crime wave and police officers are not answering. You have streets get so bad that you can't drive up and down them. You start closing parks, closing swimming pools, those types of things that are real visible. I think then you're going to have people stand up and say, wait a second, what's going on here? Well, but I think the Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party are really the kind of the opposite sides of the same coin. I mean, there's this tremendous frustration out here, and you've got one group that tends to be sort of older and white, and a younger group that tends to be younger and more diverse, and they're sort of through their own cultural experiences expressing that frustration. I mean, you know, there's not really a unified political philosophy in either one of those groups. It's just that they're mad, and then they're expressing it in their own ways.
Well, let's talk about District J, which is, I think, an area that probably benefits from public transportation. Are they interested in having the city invest in rail, or should they be paying attention to the analysts that say that we're actually doing pretty well as far as with our present system of public transportation, we're relying mostly on bus transit?
You know, I think a lot.
Bill is smiling for some reason.
I think a lot of folks in that community are worried about crime. There's a lot of gang activity out there. You know, a lot of gangs kind of, you know, they're worried about too many cantinas, you know, too many bars that, you know, problems happen, you know. There's a thriving business community. You go out and you see all sorts of businesses, you know, along the strip malls and things like that. And in order for that to continue to grow, I think those folks want, you know, their crime and their infrastructure needs met.
And you don't include rail in that?
Well, right now, rail isn't included in that, you know.
The light rail doesn't come close to it. The light rail doesn't come close to 90% of the city. But the bus service is very important.
That's all financially driven. I mean, we're still back to the budget issue. Because more police, more security, more infrastructure, that's still back to the budget issue.
What about crime, Bill King? You've made, once again, you know, the Chronicle columnist here makes the argument that, you know, crime is really not the issue that Marc says it is, or maybe it's just in people's heads, because as you identify and as we can all see, the numbers are just going down. I mean, people are all of a sudden behaving better for some reason if you look at crime rates, and yet there is this disconnect.
Crime rates are down all over the country by very significant margins. But you do have certain hot spots, and J is a hot spot for crime. And there is a lot of most of the gang activity we have is in that Gulfton area out there. And so it is something that's on those people's minds. I can tell you from attending some neighborhood meetings and stuff out there.
And so all we see on the 6 o'clock news, though, and some of the dramatic stories in the Chronicle are about police, overzealous police brutality, kicking minority kids around. There were 30 shootings in the last year and a half. All of them cleared by grand juries, by the way. Cops shooting mostly minority men. So is District J? Are they worried about the cops, Mr. Campos?
No, and I think the problem that we've seen, you know, I'll hand it to this administration. You know, the mayor, you know, hasn't been shy about stepping in and, you know, and doing, you know, what's right, you know, holding those officers accountable, you know, so I'll give her that her and her police chief.
Oh, they beat up a guy and they get suspended for a day. There are people getting shot. There was one guy shot in the back of the head riding his bicycle. Okay, not indicted. Another one beaten to death in the Harris County Jail, which is, as you know, run by Adrian Garcia. No build. There is. I'm telling you, there is no check, it appears to me, on police violence.
I don't know. I've actually sat on a grand jury and handled 2 police shooting cases. And while I can't go into the details because of grand jury secrecy, I will tell you that the stories that I saw in the press and the evidence that was presented in front of the grand jury were pretty dramatically different. So I don't know that I'd jump to those conclusions.
30 for 30. That's that's the only evidence I have. Sorry. So the leadership question that has come up in other discussions like this about what happened in the legislature and whether or not the city truly organized in a way to oppose, the loss of education funding, oppose other severe cuts to services that impact the city of Houston. And the argument was made, we weren't there. We just let, Mayor Parker, the business community, just let Rick Perry and that group do whatever they pleased and did not say a word. Is that fair criticism?
Having served in the legislature, no, I don't believe that. I think that this was driven from the top, and I don't think that the city of Houston could have done anything about it if the mayor had been standing in the aisles going, no, no, no. I mean, we obviously had a governor preparing to do something else, run for a higher office, and so he had an agenda that needed to be met to set the record to be able to do that, and everybody complied with that. I don't think you can blame the city of Houston anymore. You can blame the city of Dallas or city of El Paso or anybody else.
I mean, elections have consequences. There was an election in 2010 that had a specific result. They put, 101 Republicans in the state house. I mean, those elections have consequences. You don't like that result, go out and vote a different way next time.
The cities, when they prepare, they have one goal in mind, and that's not to further the interests of the great state of Texas. It's to protect themselves from the legislatures for 140 days or so. And this time around, I think Senator Patrick and others tried to do an end around on Rebuild Houston, the drainage fee, and so they had to spend a lot of resources dealing with that. They were dealing with, other issues to protect themselves. And, it's kind of like, you also had Governor Dewhurst, who's eyeing or thinking about running for the United States Senate, making, hard right turns. At one point, he even reneged on the deal with his, 31 other state senators on the budget, whether they use the rainy day fund or not. So we had that kind of environment we had to deal with.
So all I'm asking is whether or not you think that the people living in District J were well represented by the city of Houston in their lobby effort in the Texas legislature this last session.
Yes.
They were well represented.
Yes, as best they could, given the circumstances. Alrighty, because the drainage fee is infrastructure, and District J is one of the areas that's going to benefit from it.
Anybody know anything about the propositions that are going to be on the ballot?
Absolutely not.
10 of
Other
them.
than there are 10 of them.
Water seemed to be one that was.
They all passed by like 145 to 5, and that did not reassure me either.
Well, so to continue with the discussion about the legislature in District J and services therein, HISD just joined a lawsuit against the Texas Education Agency and the funding authorities of the state of Texas. Marc Campos, that's, you just said that's a largely Hispanic majority of kids that have to resort to a lawsuit to make their points. And you're saying political argument didn't matter. Our legislative leadership, they should have been just quiet.
Well, public education funding in this state, I've often described it as been the mother of all public policy issues in the state. Since a lawsuit was first filed against the way we fund our schools, the equity in it, back in the late 60s. And, there've been lawsuit after lawsuit filed against it because the legislature and the business community of this state have never been courageous enough to put forward a system in which, our schools are adequately funded and there's equity, because some school districts, their tax base is so low and so poor that they have to tax at a higher rate just so they can pay teachers a decent living. Other school districts, in wealthy areas, they can tax at a lower rate because they have so much property. And so until we, get down and fix it, we're going to have lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit.
And we've had study after study after study. There's a fabulous study that Joe Jaworski chaired in 1968 for Governor Conley. We were in an emergency then on schools. There were many proposals.
You mean Leon, maybe?
I'm sorry, Leon. Right, Leon.
Joe's the mayor of Galveston, right?
Right,
So
right.
he was too young then.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great study to read because you just kind of go, if we'd have just done that back in 1969 and 70, we would not be down this hole we're in.
Why don't we just have a unified organization at the City of Houston level that also manages our education needs, like New York?
Well, I think the City of Houston needs to manage its own problems, and then it can worry about the school districts. I like having those separated for right now. But, you know, the fundamental problem you have in school finance is that you have one group of people that are paying for the school system, which tend to be older white homeowners who don't have kids in the system. And so you have a group of people that are paying for the system, they're not getting the direct benefits out of it, and they don't have the same interest. It's not like when I grew up down in Clear Lake where all of the parents were property owners and had kids in the school, so there was an identity of interest between, you know, here's the taxes I'm paying and here's where my kid's going to school.
Spoken like a true columnist. Thank you, Bill King. Sue Schechter, Marc Campos, thanks to all of you for being here. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, Red, White, and Blue. Read about the guests, watch the shows, along with a follow-up discussion. Coming up next, after tonight's Red, White, and Blue, is the Houston Area League of Women Voters debate featuring the candidates running for Houston City Council District J, moderated by Houston PBS's own Ernie Manous. So until next time, get informed and get active.